Catherine said, and as we all know, the tradition in the Bridge Club is to start off with a toast. So I was thinking about what would be a good way to kind of start this off, and I came across a quote that I thought was appropriate given how pioneering everybody here is. The quote is, "The best way to predict the future is to create it." So in the honor of the Bridge Club, thank you for putting this together. And if we could all cheers as a thank you to everybody here as we're creating that shared and awesome digital future. So cheers.
Cheers. All
okay.
Right.
So to jump into it, I will be speaking towards the economics of telehealth. And just to kick things off, I thought it was important to, and Catherine did a great job of illustrating this point of making sure that we're all clear about what I'm not talking about, which is VCPR, okay? As professionals, I think all of us here are aware that to practice telemedicine, VCPR has to already be established. And it cannot be established remotely. And, you know, we're quite conservative in our approach to this. So if you'd like to have a debate about it, you know, we can bring it up in the Q&A, but I really recommend that you check out Dr. Lori Teller's presentation on the topic, because she did an excellent job. It was really comprehensive. They talked about what is it attached to, state by state, what are some differences on how it's established, and that's a great resource that you can listen to at another time. But what I'm here to really go into is the economic side. And from our point of view, the economics are quite straightforward. There's three broad levels that we look and consider when we're thinking about this. Do the pet owners and not the vendors want the service that's being offered? Okay? We want to make sure that this isn't a solution that's looking for a problem, okay? But rather that there's a legitimate need. Two, who's really benefiting? We need to make sure that the tools that are being created benefit both the pet owners and the veterinary profession, and that they're not being used to bypass VCPR. And lastly, hey there, lastly, we want to make sure that if there is a need and there is this mutual benefit, that, you know, that we're able to measure and monetize it. And so that's what we're going to be addressing today. And the last thing I also want to make sure that we cover is that we have a common baseline of understanding with regards to the terminology, because I think some of these words are thrown out interchangeably, and we need to make sure that everybody's kind of coming from a common shared base of understanding. So for the purposes of this discussion, when I talk about telehealth, it's with regards to the broad universe of digital communication with your clients. It's a very broad umbrella term. Telemedicine is a bit more specific. So it refers to treatment and diagnosis through a digital medium, okay? And since we have such an awesome group of people here in the space, could someone perhaps volunteer what they think the definition, or what they interpret the definition of triage to be? Don't be shy.
Okay, I'll go.
Sure. Thanks, Brenda.
Someone has to speak up here. All right, so, oops. Triage to me basically means you're trying to quickly assess and problem solve. I keep thinking of, like, you know, in the war, you're sending people from one tent to the next to figure out who is the most desperate for help.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of truth there, and it's certainly one applicable setting. Does anybody else have anything? I think that's a great example. War is a fantastic example right there. The way that we kind of look at this, at least in our context, is, you know, making sure that the client, when they're calling in or where they're reaching out, through video, through chat, through phone, is getting the right care at the right time, like you said, in that war setting. So it's not a substitute for a physical visit. It's not if the pet needs to be seen, but rather how soon, right? And so we're making a recommendation as to whether the pet in this instance, you know, needs to go to the emergency room immediately, or if the issue isn't an emergency, then we can help them schedule an appointment with their practice for the next business day. But the key is no treatment and no diagnosis. So there's that distinction. So I'm going to be focusing this presentation predominantly on the after-hour care segment, since that is what we can speak to the best, but with the understanding that there's a huge amount of opportunity also in the daytime segment and through different tools and different methods. It's a big universe out there, and it's amazing how quickly the technology is evolving. So, as I said, number one, we do want to make sure that, you know, there is legitimate demand for the services out there. And do pet owners really want these tools that we're putting in place? I thought an interesting way to pose this to the group would be to ask, is anyone here aware of how many calls they think their practice receives, say after 6 p.m. or on the weekends? Okay, so no. So the silence is actually very telling. In fact, most veterinarians don't know. And I'm sure, as all of you guys understand and are aware of, I can see you guys shaking your head, most people leave an answering machine on when they're closed, okay? And it's a black hole for them, because unless they get paperwork from the emergency room the next day, or unless they get a message on that answering machine, they don't know what sort of activity they had after hours, okay? So if you had to guess how many calls you think the average veterinarian is missing per month after hours, does anybody have an idea what that might be?
I think they're missing 20 or 30 calls at least.
That's actually really close to almost exactly spot on what we're seeing. That's awesome. So what we're seeing in our instance is about up to 15 calls per doctor per month. So it's dependent on the size of the practice, obviously. It's dependent on the hours that they're open. It's dependent on they offered a similar service in the past and the demographics. It's actually a variety of factors, but on average, what we can see is about 15 calls per doctor per practice per month. Now, I'm not sure if that seems like a lot or not, but let me put it in context. If you have a 4-doctor practice, that's 60 times per month clients are trying to reach out to you and they're actively being turned away. So if we break down this math and we say, okay, clients are trying to reach us 60 times per month. Let's assume 50 of those times are true emergencies, right? That means 30 times that clients are trying to reach out to you with non-emergent demands and they're actively being turned away. Well, what if we could redirect that business back into our practice? If we assume an average transaction size of $125 per visit, right, which I think is reasonable here in Chicago. I know it varies in Oklahoma versus, you know, Alaska and California versus, you know, so it varies across the country, but $125 per visit, 30 appointments generated after hours per month. We're looking at about $3,700 top line in money that's being left on the table by the practice by not changing their operations at all. It's just by servicing the existing demand of their existing clients, okay? And again, $3,700 doesn't seem like a lot for, let's say, a practice, but if you annualize it, you're looking at close to $45,000 just being left on the table. So when you break that down, what you realize is there's a huge opportunity here by taking care of your clients better. And when we think about who is benefiting to that point of number 2, obviously the practice is, but what we see is that the clients love it. They love getting the service that they want when they want it. They love being able to reach out to their practice and know that someone is there for them. So at the end of the day, we see telehealth as a great opportunity to strengthen relationships with your veterinarians, with your veterinary practice. In our cases, we want to strengthen that relationship with the practice. And even if you're sending them to the emergency room, there's a benefit for the practice too, because you're acting as that counsel, okay? And that strengthens that relationship. So when they have a question, what we want to say here is go to your practice, okay? And we have to think about the context of, everyone knows that Dr. Google's out there, but we have to think about why. And did we create that environment, to an extent for ourselves by not giving our clients an outlet, a way to reach out when they really need us. So assuming that there is demand and that there is this mutual benefit, how do we go about measuring and monetizing it? And measurement piece is straightforward. You need analytics platforms, you need tools in place to not only understand, to be able to measure the client service experience, but you guys are running businesses, you have a P&L, and you have to be able to demonstrate an ROI. And that is really often something that's overlooked by independent practices that try to do their own on-call schedules, and they're not looking at it from a financial point of view. And sometimes they don't even pay their employees for the additional time that they're on, but there's impacts on retention, on burnout. So it's something that you want to consider. But the more interesting bit perhaps is the monetization bit, because here's where we see a huge amount of variety in the industry on service delivery methods and how you're monetizing it. And I think on the telemedicine bit, it's quite straightforward, and it mirrors very much what we see in the veterinary space with regards to cash for service. Telemedicine very typically is practiced transactionally. I provide you advice, you provide me money, simple enough. What we advocate, through Guardian Vets is actually an indirect approach. So, an alternative to that is to say, don't charge them up front, but rather monetize on the back end. And you think about, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you ever do that? Well, think about the branding of your hospital, the message that you're sending to clients when you say, hey, listen, we don't pay lip service to client service. We actually put our money where our mouth is, and we're giving you this client service free of charge. You have a question, call us for free, reach out to us. We're here for you. And what you end up seeing on the back end is the ability of a practice to monetize on, through new appointments generated, through new clients being captured after hours. A very interesting one that we've seen increasingly adopted is the ability to raise exam fees. So we've had practices that have asked their clients, hey, if we offer around-the-clock care for you, can we raise our exam fees by $1 or $2? We've seen up to $3. Doesn't sound like a buck, right? But law of large numbers here. If you have a 3 DBM practice, 5,000 active clients, you raise your exam fees by $1, and your clients see you on average 2 times a year, that's 10,000 engagements raised by $1. So you've made $10,000 top line, and your clients are going to thank you for it. So there's, when we're thinking about the industry as a whole and this pressure that we're seeing on generating more bottom line return, we have to think about it in terms of not a conflict between us and the clients with regards to price, but rather what are we doing to increasingly drive value? The last thing is with regards to wellness plans, we're seeing a lot of, we're doing some pilots with some of the larger players in the space, and we're seeing some great utilization of wellness plans. So service like this, or another telemedicine platform, being incorporated into a wellness plan as a way to enhance that offering and get more people on it, and they benefit out. The practice benefits by being able to levelize cash flows. So there's a lot of opportunity here, and how you decide to monetize that is ultimately an individual decision, but you have to think about what message are you also sending out to your clients through the mechanism that you do choose.
John, quick question on the comment about wellness plans.
Absolutely.
I want to make sure that I'm clear, that I'm understanding. When you're talking about a practice adding a wellness plan, does that mean then they would include after hours calls in a part of that wellness plan benefit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So you might have a silver, gold, platinum tiered program, and you may want to include, free after hours support as part of, let's see, the premium program. And, the price is tiered depending on what sort of perks you get. So, and it's really thinking about, you know, the monetization in terms of value instead of just, you know, price and, hey, we're going to put a margin on whatever it cost, you know,
Yeah.
time and material basis, just put a margin on top of whatever our cost is. Think about it, you know, we've seen a lot of success when the practices think about the value that they're driving to their client, because it's really a relationship that they have.
So I actually have another question that came through, and that is, you know, what is the biggest objection you're getting in triage care? So it seems, you know, in general, it would make sense, et cetera, but what's the biggest objection that you are getting?
I think it is unawareness, like almost apathy. I think to that point about, you know, the after hour care segment being a black hole, you know, we often get the response of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And there's a lot of practices out there that feel like they're doing quite well already. So why change anything? And that's a very legitimate argument. I think, you know, one thing to consider is how consumer preferences are evolving. And there's an increasing need to provide service on demand and expectation from clients that want that. And, you know, at the end of the day, how do you differentiate yourself? And what sort of message are you trying to put out to the market? And obviously the top line impact, money being left on the table. So education, I think, is a huge issue right now. Just making people aware that the problem even exists.
And so for my purposes, for those, I know we can't see everyone's hands because no one's got their camera on, but Diane, I know you were a practice owner. And I'm just curious, you know, was this something that you used triage service or no? Oh, can I hear it? Which I got her on mute. That's on me. There you go. Now you're off mute.
You know, we handled our own after hours calls, so all of our doctors answered emails largely after hours. We were pretty much available, not 24/7, but you know, if we were awake and our computers, our clients knew, they could try to get to us. And then we all shared carrying a pager. So if the pager went off, then one of us would return the call to the client. So we wouldn't have utilized it, but I can see where many practices would, especially since more and more veterinarians don't like the idea of after hours having to have accountability.
Yeah, and we see that a lot with, you know, practice owners that have built successful practices over a course of time and, you know, become a staple in their community. And then you have new vets that come in and, you know, that, I don't want to say the work ethics change, but I think the emphasis on work-life balance is certainly increased. But yeah, I working with practices like you guys is amazing because you already understand the value of client service. So let's just want to quickly jump into a little bit of the details too, so it's not so high level. When you're I want to provide an analytical framework so you can think, you know, critically about how you're evaluating the performance of your telehealth platform, whether it's telemedicine or triage or otherwise. With regards to telemedicine, we came up with a pretty simple formula of how to understand the bottom line impact. And that is your total practice profit will be the total number of consultations that you're doing digitally. So like if we were doing a consultation right now, times the marginal revenue per consultation. And so when I say marginal revenue is just simply whatever you're charging your clients less whatever the platform is charging you to engage in that consultation. So that's your marginal revenue, less whatever flat fee you have per month. Okay, so very simply put, let's say that you're doing a telemedicine consultation per day and you're charging $20 per consultation. Okay, and your provider, whoever that is charging you 10% per consult, and let's say $100 flat fee. Okay, so that means if you're doing 7 per week, you're doing 28 per month. You're making 18 per consult in marginal revenue after you take out that cost, that 10%, that $2. So that means you're making $504 in marginal revenue minus the flat fee. So you're making about $400 per week or per month rather in this instance. So if you think that doing a consultation per day remotely is way too little of an estimation, you can multiply it, let's say, by 5. So let's say that you're doing 35 per week, then you'd be netting $2,000 net profit to the practice through that activity, okay? And with regards to triage, I thought it might be telling to do a case study with an actual client with actual numbers that we had to back up. One of our clients in Ohio was a 4 DBM practice, had 7,500 active clients. They were looking at an average transaction size of about 125. And before using an after-hours service, they had no idea what their volume was. They had an intuition through voicemails and through ER reports. After, what we found is that monthly they were receiving about 40 to 60 calls per month. Okay. Before, clients were basically forced to use their own judgment as to whether issues were emergencies. Okay. After, clients had access to a veterinary professional free of charge, and if the issue was not emergent, could schedule an appointment right then and there for the next business day. In terms of ROI, we were able to generate 32 new appointments. We were able to capture 13 new clients. So the total monthly value for that particular practice for that 1 month was about $20,000. Now, arguably, there's a ton of value that's captured in the just new clients. So if you took that away, it's about $4K or so, because the value of the new clients obviously is over the lifetime of the pet. But still, significant money that was being left on the table. And what we were getting is a ton of reports from clients saying, hey, thanks, we love the fact that we can talk to someone on the weekend or at night. So last point I have, and then I'll wrap things up and open up the Q&A. To your point, Diane, about should I perform this in-house? We get that a lot, both from independent practices and larger chains. And it's a great question, and I think it's something that should be always considered. It's an individual decision, but I just want to highlight that there are both obvious and not so obvious hidden costs with trying to do this in-house. The obvious ones are staffing, right? So you have your DVMs, you have your CVTs, you have the cost of developing software, proprietary like we do, or third-party platform fees like somebody else might. If you're looking at technology costs specifically, building voice over IP infrastructure, medical records integration, appointment scheduling, analytics platforms, getting client feedback, audio recordings, all of this stuff, payment processing. All of this stuff needs to be done, but you can't really do it low tech at scale, because if something goes wrong, you don't have the documentation, or you don't have the processes in place to seamlessly integrate. It's going to create a lot of bottlenecks for you. So it's something worth considering. And if you try to do, like what we see a lot with independent practices, is they'll rotate a schedule. What we're increasingly seeing is burnout becoming an issue. So it's a cultural decision that you have to make within the practice, and you have to consider all of your stakeholders, not only your clients, but your staff. So I'll leave it at that. I think it was a lot to digest, and I spoke for about 20 minutes, so I'll open it up to Q&A, but thank you again.
Before you do, John, we are at our 25 minutes. So for those that need to jump off, certainly can. We will do a little Q&A here for about another 10 minutes, but we did run a little longer on that one. So this will be available for all access members. They'll have the access to the video, but I didn't mean to interrupt too much. So any questions? Let's jump on in.
Hey, John, Matthew Rumbaugh, good job. So it's interesting that use case you did in Ohio. You mentioned in the beginning that this is a great service for the owners, the veterinarians, for their current clientele. I noticed that they picked up 13 new accounts. I think you're having a hard time hearing me. So do you start flirting with that VCPR? The fact that somebody just called your service that had nothing to do with that facility.
Yeah.
How do you we got a little leeway in an emergency situation, but could that be sticky for some people?
Yeah, that's a great. So what we quickly realized is that there are the clients out there that it's part of when we decided not even to go to direct to consumer. It's a lot of people out there that try to they try to use these tools and not get regular veterinary care. We don't want that, and
Right.
there's ways to filter for that, and kind of tools that we use to filter for that. But ultimately, when someone's reaching out, what we're telling them is their issue really an emergency, it needs to be seen now, or can it wait to be seen, in which case we're going to suggest the appointment. And as long as you are in your marketing and filtering, trying to weed out ahead of time those people are trying to receive free care as much as possible, it is a really valuable engagement opportunity to even get new clients. So we're very careful to toe that line where we don't act as a substitute. But we even start this conversation, we start this issue way up in the top of the funnel by how we reach out and how we communicate, so we can attract the right people, even if they're outside the clinic, to use the service, and then we can convert them. What they end up seeing is you get that message, the record's over. And so, yeah.
Well, it's so interesting to Matthew's question. I hadn't thought about this until just now, but about 15 years ago, our golden retriever was attacked by our neighbor's dog. I called my veterinarian, who literally is 5 minutes down the road from me, and they were walking out the door. So they suggested I find another veterinary practice. So I frantically picked up the phone book and I started calling every veterinarian nearby. It was like about 6:15 at night, I guess it was. And until I reached one, and who had said, you know what, I'm getting ready to leave, but bring her in right now. And I mean, and so what did I do? Right. So the whole VCPR thing, nobody talked about that, right? 15 years ago necessarily. But I found a practice who said, you know, you're not my client, but you clearly are in need of help. Bring your dog to me right now. So clearly I left my old veterinary practice with whom I'd had a 5-year relationship and went to the new practice who was willing to stay late and, you know, see my dog because she could tell how frantic I was. And it turned out, I mean, you know, my dog had to have surgery. She was in the hospital for 6 days. I mean, you know, I had spent a boatload of money and I was a new client for life. And it's just interesting to me. It dawned on me how the idea of a VCPR didn't even come into play. It was like, this dog needs help right now. And this was the first veterinarian on a list of 7 who was available to help me. So I would have loved to have a service like that. You know, back then it would have saved me from calling 7 veterinarians. But anyway, didn't mean to make this a personal story, but it just dawned on me.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like what we really focus on heavily is client service, you know, and so thank you, yeah.
Anyway, so Matthew, you're probably like, yeah, Brenda, why'd you speak up about that? But it is interesting how we define VCPR and how, you know, in the time of a client need, you don't think about that. You're just thinking of who's going to help me solve this problem. And, you know, when you're in panic mode and you need to know, is this an emergency? Isn't it an emergency? In my case, it was, because my dog would have bled to death. But, you know, you just are so grateful to have somebody to help guide you in that case. Interesting. We get all tied up in all of our terminology, I think, and for good reason in some cases and not so good in others. Okay, editorial comment over. So,
Any other questions? Or any thoughts? The big topic when you think about triage.
Hey, John, this is Chad. So give us your crystal ball. Where do you think the triage piece is headed? Where do you think the consumer is headed in all this?
Oh, that's a great question.
I know you think about it.
Yeah. I think that I will say that I think a unified approach is the way to go, and that solutions that serve one part of the issue will, you know, over time will transform into a solution that can serve both sides of the issue. But at the end of the day, you know, I think what consumers want is to be able to better interact with their veterinarians, and how, you know, that the nature of that communication is increasingly becoming digital. So we have to move with them. And so that it's not only after hours, but it's also daytime. There's both sides of that equation. We just have to be nuanced and understand that because of VCPR, the solutions are going to be slightly different in how you can approach that. You know.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think for me, the big takeaway is that we really need to focus on meeting the consumer where they're at. And as professionals, we can help, to use the word triage, we can help guide them down the right path as to, do they need to go visit a veterinarian for that particular instance? Of course, if it's an emergency, those are pretty clear-cut cases. But still, professional judgment's a big piece of this. And that's one of those big, I think, macro discussions that we're all having in the industry is how do we make sure that the profession continues to be relevant? And I think by meeting the consumer where they're at, I think that's a critical piece of it.
Yeah, and you touched on also an existential question with regards to, you know, professionals in general, and how technology can kind of impact the relationship between consumers and the professionals.
If they're willing to embrace technology, right?
Yeah, well, the technology is coming. It's amazing to see even younger generations than I. They're on their phones and using things that even I'm already feeling like a dinosaur. So it's crazy. It's changing really fast.
Good comment. It's interesting looking around at all the little squares with the faces and the names. And I know y'all are not quiet people. And I know many of you have opinions about this or experiences with it too. So you've got a couple minutes yet to speak up and let your voice be heard. And thank you, Chad, for asking that interesting question, because it was a good one.
It was good.
Yeah. Like,
Hey, John, will you be at AVMA this year?
Yeah, I'm hoping to. Yeah.
Yeah, let's hook up. I'd like to talk to you offline a little bit.
Thank you. Okay.
Your first big hookup we've arranged, Catherine.
Hey, is this like Match? What is this? Matthew's using this as a dating game here? Come on, Matthew.
No, I just, it's match.zoom.
Exactly. It's like a brain match. We've got the whole brain match. That's what it is. Yeah.
Well, I can see.
I think what you're doing, John, is critically important. You know, we're all tapping into this after hours market. I think it's the direct consumer. I like your traditional approach with the telephone, because even with all the technology, I still reach for the phone when I need something. I want to get to the phone. You know, it's just a go-to. It's just a go-to for everybody, except for my kids.
That was
they go to their phone to get to the app to get in touch with you. So
yeah, that was the immediate thought. It's just what's the lowest barrier to you know, for the consumer, and like you said, yeah, everybody has a phone, and we still, you know, love talking to people, and this is a perfect testament to that, you know. So.
Well, I will say this: in a moment of an emergency, if you are waiting for the 3 dots on your text message, and you're waiting for them to respond, and the anxiety is getting higher. Are they texting or are they not? Are they telling me what's happening? And actually have the voice on the other end of the line hear your concern, hear your emotion. I'm terrified. I need to know what's happening. Is my dog or cat going to be okay? I think that you can't put a price tag on that, but I will tell you, for a consumer who's in an emergency situation, i.e. go back to Brenda's example, someone said, just come on in. We are here. You don't have to wait. We're going to take care of you. And so I think there's a tremendous value in the phone, in having that human voice. I think it's incredibly important.
And we are working on asynchronous, other platforms as well, where, I think, especially in certain contexts, maybe you don't want to be seen, but the pet owner wants to be able to show the video, or show the picture. But yeah, I think there's a lot of nuance with communication that needs to be verbally and visually communicated, especially when a pet owner is like anxious and trying to interpret what's going on with their pet that doesn't talk. As much information that you can get out there is helpful.
I think that's absolutely fantastic. Well, we are at our additional 10 minutes, so we will go ahead and wrap up for the day. Unless there's any parting thoughts, we'll give John the last word here. And those of you who are All Access members will get access to this video. If you are not, you can easily join the Bridge Club formally. Brenda and I would love to have you as members. And we too will be at AVMA.
Let's meet for coffee.
If anybody wants to hook up with us, just let us.
Yeah. And we are hosting a very special event. And I know Gina was on here. I think she may have jumped off, but we are hosting a very special bourbon with the Bridge Club. We're bringing the bourbon back. And so that will be on Friday the 13th. So if you are interested in that, check that out on our website. But John, any last parting words?
I mean, I'm just looking around here. A lot of you guys I've already met, so thank you so much. It's good to see some familiar faces here. And I can see some of you guys smiling already. But thank you for attending. If you have any questions, obviously let's chat. But it's really exciting times that are coming ahead, and it's a testament to see all these amazing people coming together for this topic. And anyway, thank you for your time. Thank you for the Bridge Club, and I'm sure we'll see each other soon.
All right. Cheers, everybody.
Well.